As we are being gripped by summer, temperatures will of course increase. So in this redgamingtech.com video, I'm going to be talking about heat and stability of your system. This is going to be the first of a few part videos. In this one we're just going to be talking mostly about the signs that your system's overheating and basic stuff that you can do. Now, before we get into this, why would your system be overheating? Well, quite simply, it could be numerous reasons, including dust and so on. But let's talk about the symptoms of it. Well, mostly you're going to be heavily noticing it if you're doing strenuous activities. This would be not limited to video encoding, gaming, 3D rendering, or pretty much anything similar. Basically anything that is going to be heavily taxing either your graphics card, your CPU, or the system as a whole. And obviously all electronic parts put out heat, and for the most part, especially during winter time, your system's not really going to be overheating. However, particularly in summer, temperatures are going to be toastier. So one of the major symptoms of this, as I've mentioned, is if your system's doing something quite strenuous and you notice a lockup. Now, this is not necessarily exclusive to heat. There could be other problems such as RAM, bad RAM, but we're going to be mostly looking at it from the heat perspective, and I will be releasing another video soonish actually. There's going to be a basic system diagnostic video, and that will of course probably be over a couple of parts. But anyway, for this one of the major and easiest ways you can actually test your temperatures is just basically restart your system, hammer either the delete key or what have you, and look in a BIOS. Now, before anyone mentions that obviously this is only going to be the idle temperatures, in other words, these are going to be the minimum temperatures for your processor. Generally speaking, you're going to want to do this under load, but for my personal opinion, it's the quickest and easiest way just to verify that temperatures are a problem. Generally, if you're finding that your CPU fans are clogged, for example, or you've got very poor case flow, you're going to probably notice this at least somewhat under ideal conditions. And ideal conditions are basically your system is doing nothing. So in other words, if in BIOS you notice your temperatures are fairly toasty, what toasty would be is heavily dependent on your CPU. For example, if it's say 40, then you're probably in the toasty region. On other CPUs, toasty, can be a little bit warmer or a little bit cooler, but generally you don't want to be much more than 35 to 40 on idle, and even 40 is really pushing it, to be honest with you. You probably want to be a bit cooler than that. Under load, and by load I'm referring to, of course, your CPU basically being heavily taxed. You really don't want to be much more than the high 50s to mid 60s. Once again, this heavily depends on your CPU. Some CPUs do run hotter than others. So before this you consider this to be a blanket statement, it is not. It really does depend on the CPU, and I cannot go through a list of every single one. So you might want to Google it yourself. Just go to Google and type in ideal operating temperatures for X, X being of course your processor. Now, if you notice that your CPU is quite warm, particularly in BIOS, the next step is to download an application such as Prime 95. You'll probably want the 64-bit version if you happen to have a more later processor, or a 32-bit version if you have a older processor and or operating system. To check your operating system and know what version it actually is you're running, you can simply left click on a start menu, right click on computer/my computer depending on which version of Windows you are running, click on properties, and right there it will say the type of operating system you're running. Under the system menu it will say something like installed RAM. You will notice processor, installed RAM, and then system type, and it will say either 32 or 64-bit operating system. Once you've got that, you'll want an application to actually find the CPU temperature. Something like Core Temp is reasonable. All these applications, by the way, are free. You'll just want to run Prime 95, leave it running for maybe 20 to 30 minutes with, of course, Core Temp running also, and you'll be able to see the temperature of your CPU under unideal conditions. In other words, the CPU being heavily taxed. Once you have identified that it is actually a heat problem, and this can also occur on graphics cards as well. You can use something like MSI Afterburner, which does give you a temperature readout, and you can simply look at the temperature on the graphics card. Once again, you'll have to Google depending on the graphics card. Some cards are going to be naturally hotter than others. What you can do on this one is either, if it is your graphics card, you can increase the fan speed a bit to see if that adds stability using, once again, MSI Afterburner, or you can take the card out and clean it. I'll get into that in a moment. Now, if you ascertain it is the heat that is the problem, then your probably best bet is to open up your PC. If you're familiar with the process of building PCs, then obviously that's going to be a piece of cake to you. If you're not, then obviously it can be a little bit scary. But nevertheless, once you've opened the side of the case, obviously you'll now be looking at the bare innards of your computer. So what you're probably going to want to do, first of all, is just have a quick... Obviously, by the way, this system has to be off. I just want to clarify that. So once you're inside, just have a look to see what the dust is like, particularly over the CPU fan, obviously, and also the RAM fan, RAM slots and actual RAM heat sinks, that kind of thing. And you also want to check out your graphics card. You'll probably need to remove your graphics card. If you do that, just be aware of the little clip that is usually on the PCIe. I'm assuming you're not using AGP slot, so just be aware of that, because sometimes people forget and they wonder why they can't take the card out, pretty much. Once you've taken out your GPU, that's your graphics card, you just have a quick look to make sure all the fans are free of dust and so on. You can use a vacuum cleaner. Bear in mind, if you damage your system, by the way, I'm in no way responsible, and neither is RGT, but you can use a vacuum cleaner. Just be sensible when you're doing it. Don't put it on full suction and then have at it on the circuit board. Just, be very careful. And just go at it. You can also use a can of compressed air, which is a lot safer. I generally go with the vacuum cleaner approach. I have not had a problem. I don't, however, go over the circuit board. I just use it for the fans on the graphics card and the vents, that kind of thing. And I've never had any problems. Once again, however, being careful is the key. I just want to emphasize that. Don't, be too boisterous, even with compressed air, because obviously you don't want to knock something, which is generally more damaging. You also, by the way, be probably advised to statically discharge yourself, particularly if you are attaching electrical components, shall I say. The best way to do this is with your system off. Still plugged in at the mains, by the way, but off at the PSU, you could just, touch part of the case, which will statically discharge you. And you also want to avoid doing this on stuff like carpet. Just to clarify, static electricity can murder your system, and I kid you not. You can also look at making anti-static wristband. I will not cover that in the video. You can either buy them or you can make your own. You can Google it. There's tons of guides available out there. So, anyway, what about if it's your CPU cooler? Well, if it's your CPU cooler, the best way to do it, obviously, is can of compressed air, or you can simply vacuum very carefully. You might have to remove your cooler. I'm not going to cover this in depth because it heavily depends on your socket type, and even, for example, AMD have had several revisions of cooler, and obviously Intel have, and also you might not be using a stock cooler anyway. You could be using something like the Arctic Freezer Pro, or goodness knows what else. There are so many different third-party coolers out there. I can't possibly cover all of them. If you're unsure how to remove it, you'll have to Google it. Chances are, if you've never opened up your PC before, it's going to be a default cooler, so you might want to look into that first, just to see what it looks like, and if it matches, then go ahead and Google it. I'm obviously assuming right here you could know what your CPU's like. If you're not sure what that is, then you're going to have to, check under system properties, which is actually exactly what I told you where the operating system is. But to be honest, if you're not that sure on this kind of stuff, you probably shouldn't be tampering with your PC anyway on this kind of level, so get a friend to do it if necessary. Once again, you can take your CPU out. Be aware that if you do this, if you take the cooler off, it will most likely require you to add more thermal compound to the CPU. So you actually have to clean the CPU. The best way to do this is something like rubbing alcohol is fairly good, as in nail polish remover. Be extremely careful. You do not want to get this in your eyes, and you also, of course, do not want to get this over the circuit boards of your PC. You'll also need to, of course, clean the actual bottom of the CPU cooler, the part that actually makes contact with the CPU. Now, just to reiterate on this one, if you happen to have a regular CPU cooler, so in other words the stock cooler that comes with your processor, you might want to consider investing in something better. Now, what's best heavily depends on what socket you have, what setup you have in your case, that kind of thing. Obviously, in a perfect world, people would have something like, oh, I don't know, water cooling. But in majority of the cases, that is not the case, and obviously how much money you have to spend. I'm not going to heavily go into this one. I probably will in another video. But you're going to be at least looking for something like the Arctic freezer, something like that. That's kind of like your minimal level. Obviously there are better ones out there. You might want to just Google what is the best cooler for your processor. Insert that here. I can't cover everything, and also, it's not really the purpose of this video. So, with that said, you also want to have a quick look at the case's airflow. The airflow is very simple. It's basically how air is distributed inside your case and pulled in and extracted. Remember, it's not just about the air being pulled into the case, it's also about the hot air being expelled from the case. This is extremely important, particularly from the graphics card kind of region, where hot air actually has a tendency to kind of clog at the bottom, and then because obviously hot air rises, it sometimes kind of congregates near the CPU or under the graphics card, depending on the layout of your case. Some cases have a PSU at the bottom, some cases have a PSU at the top. My case, for example, has the PSU at the bottom with the fan pointing upwards at the sky. A lot of other cases, however, have it the reverse way. So I can't really, give you 100% depending on the layout of your case. What I will say, however, regard this is generally as a rule of thumb. You will want the air to come from the front of the case and then be expelled at the rear of the case. The reason is simple. Obviously, there's a lot less room for cool air at the back, so obviously you want air to be the same direction. You don't want, for example, some fans pointing inwards at the rear and some pointing out. That's not a good conducive way to airflow, and a very simple way as well, particularly if your case is not one with a window or you just don't care what it looks like. You can use some sellotape, or cable ties are a lot better and aesthetically, as well as for safety reasons, and you can just cable tie all your wires so they look a lot nicer. You can also get cable wrappings, that kind of stuff. In case you're wondering about prices, they're very cheap. Cable ties are basically free. You can get them from pretty much anywhere, including Staples or what have you. As for the CPU wrapping, the cable wrappings, you can get them from various places, including, for example, Amazon or what have you, or any good PC store. So once you've got those, you'll just want to wrap them around the cables just to make sure that they're clean, as tidy as possible. Obviously, for cabling, if it is already dusty, as well as the fans, for example, on your PC, you'll want to take them out, and this is a case where you can go nuts with lightly wet sponge. Obviously, you don't want the water to be inside the case. That's why I said remove the fans first. If necessary, you might have to add 1 or 2 extra fans to your case. This should bring down the temperature significantly. Once again, assume good airflow. You will want your cables to be as tidy as possible. You don't want them to be located in front of fans, for example. If possible as well, you can have a look at the location, for example, of the hard drive, particularly if your case is one of those who have a fan at the front. Generally speaking, fans at the front are located at the lower end of the case, and generally speaking, on most cases, that was also the location of the hard drive. So, particularly if your drives are kind of in the middle of where fans, you might want to adjust the locations a little bit to try and at least keep them out of as much airflow as possible. It's actually good in a way because obviously hard drives do put out quite a bit of heat, so it's only a positive thing that they're cooled. Just be careful that they don't kind of block all the air going in. As for side fans, you can add those if necessary. Most cases now do actually add one at least, so you can decide upon that yourselves. Obviously, I'm not going to go into everything. For some people, obviously, silence is a virtue and they don't want their system to sound like a jet engine. That I completely understand. If that's the case, you will probably need to spend a little bit more on a fan and just make sure that the fan is actually a silent version. It generally does say. Before you buy it, you might want to do a bit of Googling for a review or something similar. Anyway guys, this video is a little bit longer actually than I thought it would be. I guess kind of got carried away. Once again, this is just a very brief overview. I will be putting out a series of videos on this at some point or another. This, however, should just get you started. I will be probably even covering how to install a dedicated cooler, or should I say a dedicated third-party cooler at some point as well, and I'll be putting out some other videos as well which will just be covering basic heat sensitivity and various other bits and pieces, so look out for that. I'll also be, as I've mentioned previously, covering other stuff which will be more along the lines of, you know, basic system stability, how to stop your PC from basically crashing, ways to, you know, test RAM, all that kind of stuff. So, with all of that said, hopefully you guys have found this a little bit helpful, kind of, especially if you're feeling that your system is becoming a little bit less unstable recently. So anyway, take care of yourselves guys, bye for now.